Hello, welcome. I'm Pauline from PQW and I'm delighted you can join in this session. I want to introduce you to my Quilt As You Go technique that I developed. I call it the back-to-back technique. Now, in developing this technique, I needed to have the right tools. So I want to introduce you to my sasher collection. I have designed these many, many years ago. I am the original designer of these tools, even though people are starting to copy me, but we have the best products out of all of them. This is a set of 10. Now, in my range, I have 18 different sizes, which means we can make any size sashing we want. Now, I've called them the sasher collection because they are generally used to make sashings, but you can use them to make your bindings, you can use them to do bias strips, you can use them to do fabric on the straight grain. No matter what you're doing, these tools will fold your fabric for you. Then once I started developing my technique with Quilt As You Go and I started getting lots of questions about it, I decided to write my very, very famous Quilt As You Go handbook. Now, this book is all about teaching you the different ways of putting your quilts together. But as I said, in this video, I'm going to show you how I do my quilts in the back-to-back technique. So my book goes through and shows you lots of things about setting up seam allowance. I do put spare pages in the book because I want you to use this as your handbook. So when you make your first Quilt As You Go quilt using my techniques, write down your needle positions, write down your seam allowances, write down the measurements that you've cut your fabric for your sashings. We go right through and we show you step by step in the book, much more than what I can show you in this video. So it is a really great guide to how to put your quilts together using the back-to-back technique. Lots of different sashing ideas. It's not a design book. There's no patterns in it. It's all about the technique. So go through and learn all the different things you can, and it has my between the block technique as well, so you can do a lot using this book. Now, this little quilt, I call it Hearts Abound. It was my very first quilt I made using my back-to-back technique. So when I'm producing a little quilt like this, and it could be a much larger quilt, any size quilt can be done like this. If you've got a quilt that has a sashing running through it, no matter what size your blocks are, you can put it together in this technique. I can't use blocks that have a 1/4 inch point. So if I've got any piece blocks in the quilt that I'm making, I cannot use this technique. I have to use the between the block technique, which you need to watch that video. But here, making these blocks up, what I've done first is I sandwich my 3 layers together for each of these squares and each of these triangles. I quilted each block first with my right through my 3 layers. Then I did my applique over the top of the quilting, and then I've joined it together using what I call a double up sashing. So you can put a single sashing on, you can do a double sashing, you can do sashings with little peeper strips or flanges down the side. You can do any sort of pieced sashing, and we'll show you how to do that using our tools. But I want to show you the back of this quilt because it just is lovely. If you use the same fabric on the back of each block, your quilt will look like it's one full piece of fabric on the back, but it's not. If you look in very, very closely, you're going to see a seam line running through here. So use a busy print fabric, something that's fairly busy in its print. Use threads that blend in completely, and when we seam our blocks together and put the sashing over the top of the seam, you have nothing on the back. There's no sashings going on the back with this technique. It's all on the front. So let's put this little quilt aside and we'll get started. So now here we have some blocks that are made. So I've as I said before, we've quilted the blocks first. We've done the applique over the top. Now I've quilted in a lovely cream thread in the top of the machine. I had a cream thread in my bobbin because it blended in with the backing fabric. But when I do my appliques over the top of the quilting, I have the mono poly clear thread in my top and my bobbin of my machine. So when I stitch these on, whether I use a straight stitch, whether I do it free motion, like sketchy applique, or where I might do blanket stitch by machine, I always have that monopoly thread in the bobbin. Then when you look closely at the back, you don't see that I've stitched the appliques on after I've quilted. So once you've got that done, trim your blocks back to size to what they should be. Then we simply put our blocks wrong sides to wrong sides, back to back. Back to back. Then we're going to seam a seam down here between the two blocks. And this is what it'll look like. So go through and join all of those blocks together like such. Now I usually use about a 3/8 inch seam here because I find a 1/4 inch seam is just too narrow. Now we want to press this seam flat, but if we press with the hot iron, because we've got the batting in that seam, you find that it won't stay down flat. So use your Roxanne glue basted. This is a wonderful, wonderful product. It is water soluble, so it's always going to wash out of your quilt. It doesn't clog up on your needle. It doesn't stick to the iron. And as I said, it washes out. So I'm just running the glue underneath the seam. Then grab your hot iron and press. So that hot iron is now going to set the glue. You can let it set naturally, but it's going to take 20 minutes to half an hour. And if you're like me, you never have time to do that. So go through and do that with all of your blocks as you join them together. So I usually join 2 blocks together and then I'll go through and make the sashing. Now to make the sashing, whatever size tool you're going to use, we'll just come back to these tools. Now we have in here 10 different sizes, so we can go right up to a 2.5 inch wide sashing. I'm going to make a 1 inch wide sashing, so I'll get the 1 inch tool out of the pack, and I'm also going to use the 1/2 inch tool. So the measurements written on the tool is your finished size, and you will always need to cut your fabric double that measurement. So for a 1 inch, I cut my fabric 2 inches wide. So here I have my fabric cut 2 inches wide. I'm just going to fold in and in till it meets. Just press about the 1st inch. Now that's going to allow you to put it into the sasher tool accurate, because if it doesn't go in accurate, it's not going to come out accurate. So the 1 inch tool, I'm going to hold it by the handle and I'm going to thread up and back down. It's very, very easy to thread. Now I'm going to pin this end into my ironing surface, and here's a little tip for you. When I made this quilt here, as I said, it was my first quilt. When I was ironing the stripe fabric, because that's one piece of fabric from side to side, it's not 2 small pieces, it's 1 piece, I pinned into my ironing surface with 2 separate pins. I pinned this side and then I pinned that side. But as I started to iron, my stripes started to run off skew. And I realised at that point that because I put the pins in separately, I didn't get equal tension on both sides of that stripe fabric. That's when I decided to start using the double fork pin. This is a twin pin, 2-prong pin. Now when I pin into my ironing surface, either side of that pin goes on either side of that fabric, and because I pin in together, I'm getting equal tension, so my stripe fabric will not stretch. It will all stay even. So that's just a little tip. Now cup up the side of the sasher tool, I designed that with a curve to sit the side of the iron into. No matter what size iron you use, you just put the iron against the tool and you push. And you just keep pushing, cupping up the edges. Now iron about 12 to 15 inches, and it's much easier on your bigger ironing board. Remove the pin and reposition the pin so it catches either side of that fabric, and just keep coming down. So you can make any size sashing exactly like this. Just run the iron over it up and down a couple of times to get the nice heat in, to keep that crease there nicely. So we have our seam glued down. We'll now put the sashing over the top. And once again, I use the Roxanne glue based because I find if I pin this in place, as I start to pin in, it's going to distort this and it won't stay nice and straight. So I find the glue is the best tool I can ever have for this. And I tried many glues, but I found the Roxanne glue was the one that didn't clog to my needle, didn't stick. It always washes out when I wash the quilt. And ironing over it and it doesn't stick to your iron is fantastic. So just press that. So now everything is held in place perfectly even while we go to the machine and stitch that. So I would come now and I'd have the mono poly thread in my bobbin and in the top of the machine still, and I will do a row of stitching really close on the edge. And the best foot on your machine to use for this is the open toe foot, and move your needle position over. So you want the edge of the foot sitting right against the edge of the fabric, and you want your needle sitting on the inside edge of the fabric, and stitch a straight row of stitching straight down there. Then we'd cut this off, we'd join all our blocks together like that, and then we'd join the rows together. Now, when we join the rows together, it can be a bit tricky because it gets quite bulky here at the seam. So in my Quilt As You Go handbook, I show you exactly how to grade out that bulk that comes in here. But if you want to take this a step further, like I did with the little quilt I showed you before, cut yourself an inch strip of fabric, and we'll fold that in this time, in and in on both sides till it meets. We'll put this through the 1/2 inch tool, because if I was going to go through and fold this all the way through to make a big quilt, I'd be burning my fingers. But using the tool, you don't get any burnt fingers whatsoever. Up and down, pin, and then we just hold it over and we push with the iron till we get that whole strip done. And you can see how easy that is. Just run that iron back across it to get plenty of heat in. Then we simply glue that over the top of the first one. Just lay it down. And you can see how gorgeous it looks when you start to layer up. You can really dress it up. You might put one layer down, you think, oh, just not doing anything. Try a second layer and you'll be delighted. So you'll run the glue under both sides there. You'll then go and stitch that on, and you'll join your whole quilt together like that. If you're going to put borders on the quilt, quilt the borders first, and your borders would be joined to your quilt exactly like this, back to back. So I'd join the borders on, then I'd put a sashing over it. So it's a very, very simple technique. It is all covered in my book. And I'm very proud of this book that we've been able to hit the bestsellers list with this, because it does take you through step by step. And do look at the measurement chart here. I've got all the measurements worked out for you for different sashings. Do use your spare pages to write all of your information on. So when you make your second Quilt As You Go quilt, you've got everything here. So enjoy my back-to-back technique, enjoy my book, and particularly enjoy my sasher collection, because I've designed them specially for you. They won't melt like the fake ones do. These are the genuine tools. We own the rights to them. I'm the designer. I own the intellectual property to them. So thank you for joining us. Join in our Between the Block Quilt As You Go technique, because it's totally different and you might want to see how we do that. So subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit that bell so that you get notifications when we put new videos out, and also have a look at our website because we've got some fantastic tools. Our website is www.pqw.com.au. Till next time, thank you, bye.